Our guest in this segment is Teresa Morris. She is the program director for the West Virginia chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. June and November are Alzheimer's months, and in June they include the brain as well with that as Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. Teresa, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us on our program today.
Well, good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. Where are you located this morning?
So this morning I am in Scott Depot, West Virginia.
Oh, where's Scott Depot?
It is between Charleston and Huntington.
Very good. Okay. Well, I've been between Charleston and Huntington, so I passed through Scott Depot.
You have passed us on the interstate for sure.
Yeah, we did a one weekend. This was going back 30 years or so. We did a couple of high school football playoff games, and on the Friday night we drove down to Princeton, and then on the Saturday we drove across the state to Huntington.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huntington is about 30 minutes or so from where we are. So
very nice. So let's talk about Alzheimer's. How many Americans are afflicted with Alzheimer's, and do you have a breakdown in West Virginia as to what those numbers might be like?
We do. So there are more than 7 million Americans in the United States with the disease, but we also know we have about 39,000 in West Virginia. But I always like to note that about half of individuals with the disease do not have a diagnosis. So we could very easily double that number just based upon folks who get a diagnosis.
And is there a difference between Alzheimer's, dementia, and other cognitive disorders for people?
Yes, there are. So dementia is really the category, and then Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. I very simply typically say that dementia would be like saying a restaurant, and then underneath dementia you would have Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy bodies, etc. Just like under a restaurant title, you might have the Outback, Wendy's, McDonald's, etc. So the dementia is just that umbrella term that really describes a host or a combination of symptoms that include memory loss, language issues, problem solving, sequencing, etc.
Okay.
We used to think if people had that collection of symptoms that it was all Alzheimer's because we just didn't know. But now we are much better at finding that definitive diagnosis and really honing in onto what specific type of dementia a person has.
So let's talk about some of those symptoms and what a person should do should they have some of these symptoms.
So the Alzheimer's Association has developed 10 early signs of the disease, and they include memory loss, challenges in planning, solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks, confusion, trouble understanding visual images, new problems with words, misplacing things, poor judgment. Sometimes these folks will withdraw from work or social activities. And they will also have some changes in mood and personality. And as I go through the list, most people say, oh my goodness, I have trouble doing that also. But what we have to remember is that when there's an issue that needs further investigation, these folks are having these issues daily, maybe more frequently, but it's most importantly impacting a person's ability to function independently. So, you and I might misplace our phone, but typically we can retrace our steps. We can go back and think, oh, I came home, I went to my bedroom, that's probably where my phone is. But someone who's showing an early sign of dementia might not know where their phone is, not be able to retrace their steps, and most likely forget that they're even looking for it, or they might go into, another room and totally forget what they're looking for. Again, I do that sometimes. My kids say I have an Apple Watch just to find my phone, but I can retrace my steps, and I can figure out what I'm looking for. A person with dementia would have no recollection really of what they're looking for.
I appreciate the difference on this.
Yeah, I think this is something we're all afraid of, and this is John Gilstrap, and words are my business. And more frequently, I find myself in that position of, at the moment, I need to find the word, it's not there, and then I find that I'm of a certain age, and that is, it's common to all of my friends, and it's terrifying, right? This is the thing that we're all terrified of having. Here's a question I have for you. It seems to me that we hear more and more, certainly within the last 20 years, 25 years. I've heard much more about dementia and Alzheimer's than I used to. Is it because there are more cases per unit of time than there used to be, or is it we're becoming more aware?
I believe it's both. I believe we have become much better at diagnosing the disease, but we're also more knowledgeable about the disease as a whole. When I'm a speech language pathologist by trade, when I first started working about 30 years ago, we just didn't know a lot about the disease. We knew we were seeing people with this collection of symptoms, but we just really didn't know what we were dealing with. We typically said it was Alzheimer's, mostly because Alzheimer's was discovered over 100 years ago. It was kind of the first that was discovered. And so we just didn't know a lot. We didn't have a lot of research money. We didn't have a lot of awareness. And typically back then it was considered a mental health issue. So people did not want to talk about it. People still don't want to talk about it. But thankfully, over the past 30 years, we now know that this disease is a neurological issue. There is something in a person's brain that is causing them to lose their memory, to have trouble problem solving, to maybe have trouble sequencing. It's not a mental health issue. So I think that has helped increase awareness. People haven't shied away from it maybe like they once were, but knowing that it's a neurological disease, that there's damage to a person's brain that is causing these symptoms. And I just think we're becoming better. There are more cases of it based on a lot of different things, some factors that we can change in folks. But it is a very terrifying disease, and hopefully through things like this, awareness and getting more research, I think we'll just continue to get better and better at treating it. And hopefully, I pray someday for a cure for this disease.
Teresa, in response to Rob's question, the distinction between Alzheimer's and dementia, you were discussing about the symptoms of Alzheimer's, but very quickly you reverted back to labeling everything dementia. So is there any real purpose of trying to make a distinction between these two?
Oh, there is. Again, dementia is just that general term. But each type of dementia is going to have a different symptom, and there are different treatments based upon the specific type of dementia.
I can appreciate that, but again, I going back to your discussion, you're talking about Alzheimer's, but then very quickly started labeling everything as dementia. And so I find that I do the same thing. I know that there's a distinction, but I will interchange the two. Probably within one sentence, I'll invoke both of them. So I have another question, though, a specific question, is that we frequently hear there is an aggressive stage. Is this generally true, and how long does it generally last?
So overall, I'll say it this way: Alzheimer's and other dementias, the life expectancy is somewhere between 8 and 12 years, and it's really hard to pinpoint exactly the length of that because sometimes folks have it, for a year before they're diagnosed, or they might have it 5 years before they're diagnosed. So we know that there are 3 specific stages that someone will go through: mild, moderate, severe typically, and it's just really, really hard to pinpoint exactly how long each person is in each stage.
Is the aggressive stage associated with one of the 3 stages more than the others?
Not that I'm aware of. No, not that I'm aware of.
Because I frequently hear the statement that they were in the aggressive stage, and then they got out of it. They had reverted to a different personality.
Teresa Morris is our guest. Can you hear us still, Teresa? You okay? Do we still have you?
Hello?
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Can you still hear us okay?
Yes, now I can. I'm not sure what happened.
All right, very good. We didn't get into any of the early onset discussion yet, Teresa. Does your association also cover that?
Yes, we do. We absolutely do. Early onset is typically for folks before the age of 65. So we definitely talk about early onset. We definitely want folks to start this discussion and go to their physicians and get some further testing in those early stages, maybe even before a true diagnosis can be given. We call that a mild cognitive impairment phase.
Is there a treatment once diagnosed?
So there is a treatment. It is very, very new to the market. Now, this will be specifically for Alzheimer's disease, but there is a treatment right now on the market for early onset Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. And there are risks, as with any treatment, but there are some positive results being shown with this treatment.
See, this is one of those, just talking from the heart here. My father-in-law had Lewy bodies disease and ultimately passed away, not of that, but of complications from something else. And it was my observation that it was very, very difficult to watch a fine man diminish over time. But I had the sense that he was not aware of his own diminishment. In fact, it seemed like he was not terribly unhappy about his condition as he went along. Is that fair? Is that common?
I think it's absolutely fair, because we have to remember these folks are losing their ability to problem solve and to reason. So they're not realizing and then even understanding that they're forgetting things, or that they're displaying a behavior, or that they're not showing good safety awareness. They just don't have that ability to process that. So I often say, people say it's a terrible disease, and I say, well, it's a terrible disease typically for the caregivers, because the person with the disease just isn't quite aware of all of the issues that come with this disease.
Great point.
See, I'm a pragmatist on this, and again, I'm just coming from the heart here. I don't know that I would want to know.
Right.
I'm not sure why I would seek the diagnosis for myself.
I think the reason people want to get, and we advocate for getting the diagnosis, because it gives folks a little bit of time to maybe get their affairs in order. It can give the person a little bit of ability to talk about how they want, their end of life to look like. And now with this treatment for Alzheimer's disease, it has to be administered at the very, very early stage of the disease. So that's another reason why we advocate for that early detection and diagnosis. It just kind of gives the person and the family, we believe, the best opportunity for their care, their management, and potentially treatment now. Now, I will say 30 years ago it wasn't as important because doctors would say you have Alzheimer's disease, go home and get things in order. But there are some things now that we know can be effective in either relieving the symptoms and now with this treatment, slowing down the progression of the disease.
Bill, you had your hand up.
Yeah, she just answered my question. It's not going to reverse the disease, just going to slow down the progression of the disease. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Teresa, is this strictly genetic, or are there some environmental and lifestyle choices that can also bring on Alzheimer's?
No, we know that age is really the greatest risk factor, but there are risk factors that we can modify. We recommend, or we know that challenging your mind can be effective as we age. We just don't want to, retire and then never use our brain again. Try to keep learning things, get moving. Regular exercise is very important to mitigating this disease. Protect our head. We want to try to wear a helmet. And if we're, still playing those contact sports as we get older, we definitely want to have a helmet on, be smoke-free, control our blood pressure, managing diabetes, and maintaining a healthy weight. And something we've just learned a lot more about in the past couple of years is sleeping well. Good sleep is very important for good brain health.
I'm doomed.
Sleeping well versus sleeping long is a difference.
Me too. My husband and I, we talk about this all the time. I'm like, I don't know what else to do to make us sleep better, but we just don't right now. So,
Teresa, one of our Facebook listeners asked the rate of the number of Alzheimer's in the U.S. compared to that of other countries. How do we stand up?
So I don't have the exact data in front of me for that, but I do know that we are a little higher than especially European countries where they eat a healthier diet. Most of them eat closer to a Mediterranean type diet. They exercise more. Something that we've also discovered are other countries, they live with their elderly, so those folks, as they age, have more engagement, more communication. They're a little more active because they're living with grandchildren, sometimes great-grandchildren. But I don't have a specific number on that.
Teresa, how can we find out more about the Alzheimer's Association in West Virginia?
So the best way is to go to our website, which is alz.org, alz.org/WV, or you can call our helpline, which is managed by master's level social workers at 800-272-3900.
And do you do fundraising out of the West Virginia chapter as well, Teresa?
We absolutely do. We are a nonprofit, and the monies that we raise in West Virginia primarily stay in West Virginia, which allows us to have a staff that does these types of interviews, but also we provide support groups across the state, education programs across the state, and we also do a lot of advocacy for those with the disease.
Teresa, for research funding, have you been affected? Alzheimer's research been affected by the cuts in the NIH budget?
So not yet.
Okay.
We anticipate that our funding will remain in place. But honestly, there's no firm answer on that yet. We were actually in D.C. just last week with 1,000 other folks supporting Alzheimer's and other dementia, trying to garner support that we keep the funding that we currently have, and we're actually asking for a little bit more. So as of today, we still have the funding that has been previously promised.
Very good.
I think we all know right now it's a moving target, but
very true.
We are hopeful.
Teresa, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Take
Thanks,
care.
Teresa.
We are back with the final minute right after this.